Welcome back to the deep dive. We are back at it again, pulling apart the most complex, interesting, and honestly sometimes downright controversial ideas from the reading stack you probably just don't have time for.
There's always a lot to get through.
There is. And before we get into today's material, and I'm going to be completely upfront with you, this one is heavy. I do have a quick request. If you value these deep dives into hard-hitting texts that the mainstream media usually refuses to touch, please hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Yeah, it really helps.
It helps us keep the lights on, it helps the algorithm find people exactly like you, and it ensures we can keep bringing you this kind of unfiltered, objective analysis.
It makes a massive difference. And today is actually a perfect example of why we do this show. We are looking at a text that is, frankly, radioactive in mainstream circles. It's an ebook titled Yookay Today, Special Economic Zone of Population Replacement by Conrad Riker.
Radioactive is definitely the right word for it. This isn't just a casual read. It's an ultra-long, highly incisive, and fascinating manifesto, and I want to be really clear right out of the gate about who the author is targeting here.
Right, the audience framing is key.
Exactly. Riker has written this specifically for a very distinct demographic. We're talking about men's rights activists, the red-pilled community, the manosphere, basically men who look at the modern West and feel that something is fundamentally broken.
Right, and our mission today is to just impartially unpack what he's arguing. We aren't taking sides here, but we are going to lay out his exact premise. And his central thesis is incredibly bold. He argues that the United Kingdom, or as he satirically spells it throughout the book, Y-O-O-K-Y Yookay, is no longer a sovereign nation.
Right, he says it's morphed into something else entirely.
He claims it has ceased to function as a country with a shared history, and has instead become a special economic zone. A zone where, according to his argument, the native male population is being demographically replaced and economically harvested.
It's a really bleak premise, but the book essentially serves as a deep history lesson on how Western institutions operated before they were, in his words, captured by feminists and Marxists. And it acts as a roadmap for how men can reclaim their agency.
A survival guide, essentially.
Exactly. We're going to unpack the whole thing right here, but I will say this up front. If this topic resonates with you, or if you just want to understand this worldview directly from the source, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy Yookay Today.
You really have to read the primary source to grasp the scale of his argument.
You do. And you should also follow the author at Conrad and Riker on Substack because his analysis is ongoing there. But let's get into the meat of it. Let's start with what he calls the diagnosis.
Right, so the diagnosis starts with that name change we mentioned.
Yeah.
Yookay Today. Riker defines this new entity as a place where heritage is actually a liability.
A liability.
Yeah. In a traditional nation, your history is your foundation, right?
Right.
But in a special economic zone, your history is just baggage that gets in the way of global transactions. He argues that the primary export of this new zone is the dignity of the native man.
And he illustrates this early on with a really visceral concept he calls the axiom of dispossession. He uses the story of Tommy to ground this.
Right, Tommy the Royal Engineer. It's a narrative that anchors the theory. So Tommy returns from serving in Helmand Province. He's fought for his country, taken shrapnel in the leg, and he comes back expecting that the social contract is intact.
He expects the tribe to look after him because he sacrificed for the tribe.
Exactly. But the book claims that's not what happens. He walks into a council housing office and realizes he is entirely at the back of the queue. He watches as new arrivals, people who Riker points out have never contributed to the national plot, are prioritized ahead of him.
So the citizen becomes a second-class entity compared to the client of the state.
That's Riker's exact argument. That betrayal is the core emotional hook. And he explains this structural shift through what he terms the gynocentric hegemony.
Gynocentric hegemony. That's a mouthful. Let's break down what he means by that.
It sounds super academic, but it's pretty straightforward in practice. Riker argues we have shifted from a patriarchy to a bureaucratic matriarchy.
Okay, meaning what, exactly?
Well, under traditional patriarchy, you generally had male rule and male provision. Men held the authority, but they also bore the burden of providing and protecting. Under this new bureaucratic matriarchy, he argues it's female rule, or at least female-centric policy, but it still relies entirely on male provision.
So the state steps in to act as the provider.
Yes, the state becomes the husband, it confiscates male resources through taxation, and redistributes them to women and a state-dependent population.
Meaning men are still paying the bills, they just don't have any authority or respect in the system anymore.
Precisely. And Riker uses a syllogism of existence to argue why this is ultimately fatal to a society.
I do love when these texts use hard logic structures. Walk us through his syllogism.
Okay, so the major premise is that civilizations must reproduce their values and their people to survive. That's just a biological and historical baseline.
Makes sense. If you don't have kids and teach them your culture, the culture dies.
Right. Then the minor premise. He argues that current Western institutions actively discourage native reproduction through insane costs of living, feminist ideology, and so on, while simultaneously demonizing masculine values like stoicism and honor.
Then the conclusion to the syllogism.
The conclusion is that the system is functioning exactly as designed, and it's designed to destroy Western civilization. He argues this isn't an accident, it's the operating system working perfectly.
That is a staggering claim. But to run a system like that, you need massive amounts of capital. And this brings us to segment 2, where Riker dives into the economics of this replacement. He calls it the net taxpayer argument.
This is where the book gets heavily into statistical claims. Riker asserts that the yokai is fundamentally a mechanism for wealth transfer. He cites data suggesting that men pay approximately 75% of all income taxes.
75%. That's a massive share.
It is. But he notes they only receive about 40% of government benefits. And on the flip side, he claims women pay only about 25% of income taxes, but consume 60% of the benefits.
So structurally, he's saying the state is literally an engine that mines resources from men to give to women.
Yes. He explicitly calls it a gynoplutocracy. His point is that you, the productive man, are funding your own disenfranchisement. You're paying for the welfare state that renders you obsolete. If the government cuts a check to a single mother, she doesn't actually need you.
So he refers to men as beasts of burden in this economic zone.
Exactly. And he ties this massive economic engine directly to migration. He talks about the Great Replacement Protocol. Now, I know that phrase is highly charged, but we need to look at how he frames it in the text.
How does he justify that protocol?
He frames it as a cold economic necessity for the ruling class. He points to demographic shifts, like London going from 60% white British in 1991 to a minority by 2021.
Right.
But what he really hones in on is a UN report from March 2000. It was literally titled Replacement Migration.
So he's arguing they basically announced the strategy over 20 years ago.
That's his claim. Because the native population stopped having kids, partly due to the economic pressures we just mentioned. The system needs an endless supply of new bodies to keep the GDP Ponzi scheme afloat. He actually compares this directly to the fall of Rome.
Ah, the barbarian mercenaries.
Yes, Rome stopped training its own citizens to fight. They lost their martial spirit, so they hired imported labor to do the hard work. Riker argues the Yookay is importing labor because the native male has been demoralized, taxed into oblivion, and told his very nature is toxic.
And he connects this back to Tommy the Veteran with the hotel asylum concept.
He does. He contrasts migrants being housed in luxury hotels while native veterans sleep rough on the streets. He calls this weaponized empathy.
Weaponized empathy.
Right. The system demands you show endless empathy for the stranger, the other, while showing zero loyalty to your own people. It prioritizes international optics over local duty.
Okay, so we have the economic extraction and the demographic shifts. But for society to accept this, the culture has to change first. How did they pull that off?
Riker attributes this to the long march through the institutions.
Right, the old Gramsci concept, the Frankfurt School.
Exactly. The realization by 20th century Marxists that you cannot conquer the West with traditional armies. You have to capture the culture from the inside.
The slow infiltration.
You capture the universities, the media like the BBC, the corporate HR departments. Riker argues these have been successfully transformed into indoctrination camps. And the primary weapon they used was what he calls the erasure of logos.
Logos meaning logic, reason, objective truth.
Yes, he argues they systematically removed logic, classical rhetoric, and the Western canon, your Shakespeare, Chaucer, Milton from education, because those things teach you how to think objectively.
And what did they replace it with?
Grievance studies and lived experience. Riker points out that if you remove a population's ability to think critically, they can only react emotionally. They become easy to control.
He illustrates this with the story of Mr. Sterling in the book.
Yeah, Mr. Sterling is a really tragic example in the text. He's a history teacher who essentially gets fired for being competent. He refused to teach the approved narrative of shame, the idea that the British Empire was exclusively evil.
He tried to teach objective history.
Right, he taught context and balance. But in a system built on grievance, Riker argues that objective truth is treated as a hate crime. So Sterling was purged.
And the people doing the purging are usually in human resources. Riker has a very specific term for HR, doesn't he?
He calls them the Gnostic KGB, or the New Inquisition. He asserts that modern HR departments act as ideological filters, specifically designed to screen out high testosterone, independent-minded men.
Because those men question things.
Exactly. The system wants compliance, not excellence, which leads into what he calls the epistemology of the void. This is his critique of modern gender ideology.
He sees that as the final breaking point for truth. Right?
Yes, the ultimate rejection of the law of identity, the idea that A is A. He argues that if a society is forced to agree that biological reality doesn't exist, that a man isn't a man, then truth becomes entirely subjective.
He points to the medical establishment for this.
He does. He uses the Cass Review and the scandal surrounding the closing of the Tavistock Clinic as proof that even medicine was captured by ideology, sacrificing children to political correctness.
It's a full-spectrum institutional capture, but Riker also gets deeply into the personal sphere, the dating market. He calls this sexual market decoupling.
And this is where the book really speaks directly to the manosphere and red pill audiences. Riker pulls in that infamous OkCupid data set.
Oh, the attractiveness rating.
Yes, the data showing that women on the platform rated roughly 80% of men as below average in attractiveness.
Which is mathematically impossible on a normal distribution curve.
Completely illogical. But Riker argues that in a gynocentric system, hypergamy, the female instinct to marry up, goes into absolute overdrive. He uses the term cock carousel to describe this dynamic.
Explain how that works in his model.
Because the state acts as the ultimate safety net, providing housing and child support. Women no longer need an average beta male provider for survival.
They can bypass the middle of the pack entirely.
Exactly. They can share the top tier of alpha males without needing commitment because the state underwrites the risk.
And where does that leave the other 80% of men?
Isolated. Riker posits this is the root of the massive male loneliness epidemic and the incel phenomenon. He says it's a rigged market where the traditional social technologies that enforce monogamy have been intentionally dismantled.
And even if you do navigate that market and get married, he argues the legal system is waiting for you if things go wrong, the matriarchal legal apparatus.
This is a really dark section of the book. He highlights the story of Steve Bedzer, a father who was completely denied access to his children, even after passing lie detector tests regarding the allegations made against him.
Riker uses that to argue that due process is basically dead for men in family court.
He says the default position is believe all women, which strips men of legal presumption of innocence. He also cites sentencing disparities.
What are the numbers there?
He claims data shows men receive 60% longer prison sentences than women for committing the exact same crimes. The system, he argues, views male life as inherently disposable, while female life has intrinsic value.
And this ties into a really intense framing he uses around abortion, doesn't it? The sacrament of slaughter.
Yes, that's a key part of his legal and moral critique. He calls it the sacrament of slaughter. Riker frames abortion not as a healthcare issue, but as an accessory of demographic suicide. He argues the state protects this fiercely because it further decouples sex from family formation, reinforcing the state's power over the individual.
Okay, we've covered the diagnosis, the economics, the institutions, and the dating market. It's an incredibly heavy picture. But the book isn't just a list of grievances. Segment 5 is all about the roadmap out, the solution.
Right, and he calls this the reinstatement of arete.
Arete, the ancient Greek concept.
Yes, meaning excellence, virtue, the fulfillment of your highest potential. Riker urges men to stop playing a rigged game. And the very first step he outlines is purely psychological. You have to reject the narrative of shame.
Meaning you stop apologizing for everything.
Completely. You stop apologizing for male privilege. You stop apologizing for the British Empire. You stop apologizing for your biology. He argues that shame is the primary collar the system uses to keep you compliant. If you refuse to feel ashamed, they lose their leverage.
Okay, but you still have to exist in the world. He suggests building parallel systems of sovereignty, because he doesn't think voting is going to fix this, does he?
Not at all. He is very clear that the current institutions are thoroughly burned. You can't vote your way out of a captured system, you have to build new ones. So he advocates for economic withdrawal.
How does a regular guy actually do that?
Riker is a big proponent of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. He views fiat currencies, the pound, the dollar, as a tax farm used to fund your own replacement.
So, by moving to decentralized finance, you starve the beast.
Exactly. You stop funding the gynocentric state. Alongside that, he promotes monk mode.
Monk mode. That's a popular concept online right now.
It is. In Riker's framework, monk mode means intentionally starving the OnlyFans economy. He views modern porn and digital simping as weaponized dopamine addictions designed to keep men docile and weak,
Reclaiming your focus.
reclaiming your biological vitality and your resources. You stop giving your attention to false intimacy and channel it into real-world competence.
Well, you can't survive completely alone. He talks about forming Dunbar tribes.
Right, based on Dunbar's number, the anthropological theory that humans can only maintain about 150 stable relationships.
So, keeping your circle tight?
Tight, capable, and bound by oaths. Riker envisions these tribes as mutual defense networks. His premise is that since the state police won't protect you or might actively target you, you need a localized brotherhood that has your back.
A modern band of brothers. And what about families? What about the next generation?
He pushes hard for alternative education. He basically says, pull your sons out of state schools immediately, homeschool them, or form what he calls logic clubs, much like the fire teacher Mr. Sterling tries to do in the book. You have to inoculate young men against state indoctrination.
And all of these parallel structures are meant to build towards his ultimate vision, which he calls the New Jerusalem.
Yes, a techno-meritocracy, a manosphere Jerusalem built entirely on logic, stoicism, and biological reality.
It sounds a bit like accelerationism.
He calls it accelerationism light. He isn't telling people to go out and burn the system down. He's saying, let it burn itself down. Because a system that consumes more than it produces, that actively attacks its own foundations, is mathematically unsustainable.
It will collapse under its own weight.
Exactly. So the goal of the Dunbar tribes and the New Jerusalem is to build a lifeboat, so that when the Yookay finally sinks, there are capable men ready to rebuild from the ashes.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most provocative thought in the book, the Great Refusal.
The Great Refusal is the ultimate power move for Riker. He argues true power isn't marching in the street where the state can easily arrest you. True power is the total withdrawal of consent.
It's walking away.
You withdraw your labor, your taxes where legally possible, your attention, and your validation. You turn your back on the decaying system and you face your brothers.
It is a radical, comprehensive, and frankly mind-bending strategy. Riker treats this knowledge as radioactive for a reason. He claims that once you see the world through this specific lens, you can never unsee it.
He frames it as a one-way trip, a restoration of the soul. For the men out there who feel lost, who feel like they're just beasts of burden in a system that hates them, this book is an attempt to hand them their dignity back.
And that is exactly why we brought this to a deep dive today. Look, we can only scratch the surface of a text like this in an audio format. If you want the full manual, the historical deep dives, the raw data, the complete roadmap we just discussed, you need to go read the primary source material yourself.
You absolutely do.
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now, search for Yookay Today, Special Economic Zone of Population Replacement, and buy it. Consider it purchasing the manual for the coming age.
And as we mentioned, this is an ongoing dialogue. Riker is highly active on Substack at Conrad in Riker. Go follow him there to see how he applies this framework to breaking news and current events.
That brings us to the end of this deep dive. Look, if this discussion opened your eyes, or even if it just forced you to ask some really difficult questions about the society you live in, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. It helps the algorithm, and it helps us keep bringing you the truth. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.